This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
Hello, and welcome to this week's Killer Innovations Podcast. We're trying a new experiment this week. We're actually doing this show live for you. And just as part of a test to see if listeners find that interesting. This week's topic is around STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Kind of the buzzword here most recently with regards to training in schools and the educational system trying to look for more than just what we teach our kids today to get them ready to be competitive. Recently, I was giving a speech in Southern California. It was the topic, really not all that important, but it was about 20 years in the future. And normally I leave 25 or 30 minutes at the end of one of my talks to let people have questions. In this case, a gentleman stands up and requests a question, and go ahead and he asks away, and that is STEM enough to win or to help our kids win in the emerging creative or innovation economy? I couldn't quite tell this person whether they were for STEM or against STEM or what the real underlying issue was. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about this over the years as far as what does it really take to prepare our kids to be competitive in the upcoming or this transition to this creative or innovation economy. And what do I mean by this creative economy? Creative economy is really around this transition from a knowledge or information economy that we're in today. And what is the skill sets required where it's no longer about just the ability to do, but it's the ability to invent. It's the ability to come up with new ideas. It's the ability to, it's more of the product or the output of the mind, the ability to come up with new ideas, new products, new services, new technologies. The challenge in this creative or innovation economy is that there's today no real defined winner in that space. Just because we live in a Western economy, if you happen to live in the United States, or you happen to live in a developing country, there is no today winner in this new and emerging economy, which means it's wide open. And the fact of the matter is that education is a commodity. Education is widely available. There are great universities all over the world. Just because you live in a major country, whether it be in the UK or here in the United States or Western Europe or Canada, Australia, Japan, you name the country. Just because you may live in an area that traditionally has great universities, that is no longer the automatic win that says that your product, the students that you graduate, are the ones that are going to win in this next and emerging or the economy that's in place. We are facing this fundamental change. And so when I got asked this question by this individual in the speech about my thoughts on STEM and is it enough, STEM is the big thing right now. It's being talked about in the educational circles. Here in the United States, we focus a lot on what we call Common Core, which is, what is that basic level of reading, writing, arithmetic that's needed to give our students the basic skill sets. The United States has also swung to be very test-centric. And I've spoken out many times, both in the podcast and in my writing. And I've actually criticized U.S. politicians directly about my thoughts on the heavy focus on test. In fact, it's gotten so bad here in the United States that in my mind, what we've done here in the U.S. is that we've produced the world's greatest test takers. It's no longer about the ability to understand the underlying theory behind solving a problem, whether it be a math problem or a science project. It's simply about, I get a question, I work the formula, I get an answer, I write the answer on a test. So it's about test-taking theories and the ability to do well in tests that we're measuring, not really their ability to be great future leaders that we need in the marketplace. So from my standpoint, given this buzz around STEM, and STEM is really confined around teaching in four areas: science, technology, engineering, and math. And technology and engineering, I sometimes wonder how you separate that. But STEM is this nomenclature that if I teach the sciences, I teach about technology, I teach engineering skill sets, and I give them a good foundation of math, that is enough to create the innovators of the future. In my mind, that is just the foundation. That is just the beginning point. If I look at innovators that are highly successful, either today or in history, it's no longer about, do they have a STEM background? Do they have good science or good technology? They all have some form of foundational skills. But in my mind, it's not enough. It's not enough just to have the basic foundational skills. Because guess what? There are students all over the world that will have science, technology, engineering, and math. That is not what makes you stand out from the standpoint of being an innovator. So what's missing? There's a couple of areas that I think that we've got to focus on an educational system, but maybe even outside the traditional classroom, and give our kids and give college students and even give the workforce for your companies some experiences to expand their knowledge beyond the basic fundamental foundational pieces that they do today, day in and day out. The first one is improving critical thinking skills. Critical thinking skills are absolutely paramount to the success of the future. What do I mean by critical thinking skills? It's about how you go through the mental process of solving a problem. If you think back to your grade school times when you used to get those word problems in the math class, if Johnny goes and rides his bike 3 miles an hour towards the city and Sally's driving 4 miles an hour coming back from the other city coming the direction, at what point will they meet in the middle? It's thinking about how do you go about solving those kinds of problems, because in effect, word problems are what we deal with day in and day out. Now, the problem in history in the classroom is we teach one way to solve those problems. And that becomes really constraining. When I say improve critical thinking skills, it's looking at and finding completely unique and different ways. And this is one of those skills that if I find somebody who's really got a unique way of looking at problems and applying critical thinking skills to solve those problems, guess what? I'm going to hire them. I am going to take advantage of them and take advantage of those skill sets because that's what I lead. I need people who can look at problems in a unique and different way. Second is giving people the ability to discover their creativity, personal creativity. Years ago, I was working with the woman who ran basically the equivalent of the Department of Education for Malaysia. They were keenly interested in changing the educational model in Malaysia from a kind of a rote memorization educational system to preparing their students to compete effectively in the creative economy. Malaysia recognized that low-cost manufacturing was not a path to success for them. And so they asked for a meeting, and this was a number of years ago. So I happened to be in the region, went in and had this meeting, and it was interesting. We talked about fundamental educational systems. And they had gone off and done this big study to look at other educational models around the world. And what they've decided to do was actually model the educational system after the United States. Now, keep in mind that this conversation was probably 9 years ago with them. And what they had found through their mini multi-year study was, and what they thought was fundamental to helping kids literally discover their personal creativity, was the fact that at the time of their study in the United States, every student was required to take art and music. Now, they may not be good at art, they may not be good at music, but that free-form ability to create something that they can show to others, that there's no boundaries, there's no formula to be applied, but that they can just look at a blank sheet of paper or pick up an instrument and just make noise or just make art. It's that ability to give someone the permission to color outside the lines, to try something that's never been tried before. In my own personal case, I had an art teacher in junior high that kind of ignited my my personal creativity by giving basically very open and very free-form projects. Now, I would not classify myself as being anywhere even close to a decent artist, but it was that kind of unlocking that ability to say, wow, I can go create something. And it was the joy of creating something, not that it was any good, but then I went off and found other ways to get that experience of creating. We have to create ways for students today and our employees today to discover that personal creativity, giving them permission to create. The other key area, skill set that we need beyond STEM to prepare ourselves for the creative and innovation economy is learn to fail. We have what I would call this whole mantra around perfection. We have students who compete ruthlessly to be, the top 1 or 2 students in the class, to be the valedictorian. In Silicon Valley, it actually manifests in the local school systems where students are not only going to classrooms all day long, but they've got tutoring, and then they've got weekend classes, and then they've got their language classes. And then parents strategically pick the volunteer organizations for those students to volunteer at so that it looks good on their college applications. And these kids don't even have a chance to be kids. It's so regimented, and these kids are so fearful of failure that they would do bad in something. And therefore, in their minds, they've been told that if they aren't perfect, if they don't get valedictorian, if they don't have perfect straight A classes, that their whole life is destroyed. We have to get people comfortable with the fact that you're going to experience failure. We all experience failure. It all comes to us, whether we want it or not, you're going to fail. I've been fired from jobs. We've all have done things that we like to go back and relive and do over again. But you have to get comfortable with the fact that you're not going to be perfect. And part of the innovation game is you're not perfect. You're not going to, have a great idea and knock it out of the park every time. But what I have found by learning to fail and realizing that failure is not fatal is actually it helps build self-confidence. The fact that I have lost jobs, or I've had more than a dozen and a half startups blow out from underneath me that crashed. But what I've learned over those failures is guess what? It's not fatal. Dust yourself off, try again, go do something else. You can go get another job. You can still provide for your family. You can still be successful. Those failures, albeit we think of them as being highly negative, can actually be something very positive. Positive in the context of you learn the fact that you can survive. It's not fatal. Yeah, you feel bad. You may take a week, and that's kind of my rule when I have a big failure. I give myself 1 week to kind of moan and mope around. At the end of the week, it's over with. Done. Now, on to the next thing. Get going. And that becomes really another one of those pieces, which is that self-confidence. The confidence that says, hey, I may not know all the answers. I may not know everything that I need to go to do to be successful in the next one, but I'm going to get in there and try because I have enough confidence that, hey, if it doesn't turn out, I'll go do something else. Now, this is something fundamental in the investment community, which I find absolutely shocking. And this is something that is different in different parts of the world, and that is the whole view of failure. In the, let's say, Silicon Valley, if you fail, VCs actually like that because they know you've gone through that bad experience. And once you've had a failure, you learn from it, and you try doubly hard the next time not to fail again. And the VCs like that. In other parts of the world, failure is absolutely crushing. You list the fact that you did a startup company and didn't make it. In some countries, that will actually impact your ability to be hired. We need to change that attitude. We need to be more like Silicon Valley, more like those countries where failure is actually embraced. It's actually a badge of honor. We should hand out medals for failures because it builds that self-confidence that people can pick themselves up and start over again. So back to the original question that I got asked during the speech around STEM. Does science, technology, engineering, math, curriculums, coursework, is that enough to create innovators? My fundamental answer is it's not sufficient. It's foundational, but it's not sufficient to really be able to allow us to create the innovators that we're going to need 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And for me, it does roll back to we need to improve our ability, improve our skills around critical thinking. We need to allow people to discover their own personal creativity, whether it's students in the classroom or employees in the workforce. And we have to give permission and learn from failure. Failure is not fatal. And that allows us to build self-confidence, that ability to go out and do things. Now, does this mean that all of this needs to be run into classrooms? Absolutely not. In fact, there's a number of very interesting programs going on around the world. Take Uganda as an example. There's a group in Colorado that has developed this curriculum, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes, that teaches entrepreneurial skills. It's an after-school elective, meaning that the kids can choose to take this as an extra course. And this course actually teaches entrepreneurial. It's a 2-year kind of program. And actually now in Uganda, when it comes to graduating in Uganda, they actually give you credit for taking this course. And it's all about going from starting with an idea to all the way going through the whole process of turning that idea into a small business or just turning it into something that you can actually go out and do and have an impact. And it's a great example. It started off with a handful of schools, then it went to, 50 schools, and now it's being rolled out throughout the country. And there's other examples of this around the world where people have developing these kinds of extra curriculums. So above kind of the funnel, reading, writing, and arithmetic, putting STEM on top of that. And then there's this third element of what is those other skills needed for people to be successful. In my case, I teach those kinds of skills in the workforce because we tend to think about it from the students. We want to make the students the best workers as the shifting economy. We need to deal with the fact that we've got workforce today, and we are, in those cases, having challenges around those skill sets. So how do we reskill the existing workforce? And they need those same sets of skills. Improving critical thinking, discover that personal creativity, learn to fail, and build that self-confidence. And so, don't think about it just from the standpoint of what you need to do with your own children or your nieces and nephews or what we need to do in the school system, but also think about how do you transform your organization? How do you transform your workforce? How do you transform your skills, your abilities, so that you are competitive in the workforce as we make this change from this information knowledge economy to this creative innovation economy? Because this transition is going to be just as significant, if not more significant, than what we saw when we went from that industrial economy to the information knowledge economy starting in the 50s through the mid-70s. And I lived through that watching my father and my father-in-law working in manufacturing and steel here in the United States and watching that huge transition. We're about to enter the exact same transition in this form of this creative and innovation economy, and we need these skill sets. So, while STEM is a great start, it is not sufficient. So my question to you is, do you agree? Do you disagree? If you disagree, I'd actually love to hear from you. Where am I off? Where am I missing the point? Where am I from the standpoint of not quite getting it, or are there skill sets that I'm not talking about that are going to be just as critically important? So go back to the show notes, post a comment. I'll be watching those. I'll reply. Let's get a conversation going. What is it that we need to change? And it's not just U.S.-centric. Around the world, what is it that we need to change in order to be competitive? Each of our local economies to be competitive in this new creative and innovation economy. Love to hear from you. And by the way, as I mentioned earlier, we are doing this live broadcast today over on Spreaker. This is just one more experiment trying this out. We're trying to find a way to be more frequent with the podcast. And with the setup at Spreaker, I can do these very, very quickly. So I would love to hear your thoughts on, whether you like the show, things you would like to see differently, audio quality. Do you want the show live so that you can ask questions during the middle of the show? We'll typically do these on Sundays, so you can watch for it. I'll try to get to a regular schedule if I can, but looking for your feedback on how you like this show and like the structure. The show will be made available through all the normal means, including iTunes, etc. But we're trying this as just one more experiment to try make it a little bit easier and shorten the production time it takes for us to produce a show. So, love to hear from you. With that, thanks for listening. And again, stop back over at philmckinney.com. Post your comments, ask your questions. Love to hear from you. Thanks.
Thank you.